So first of all, I'd like to introduce our panel. I'm sure most of you know most of the people on the panel. So starting at the far end, we have Eoin McQuone, who runs his own company called Go Climate Positive. And he, I'm just going to get this right, he does kind of, I've got it wrong again. He does measures. He goes out to SME companies and measures their carbon footprint to help them to become more sustainability. And Eoin has actually been on board with from the ground up, first as an active as a committee member and now as a great supporter from the beginning. So he comes in from the businessman's kind of perspective. Next to him is Tabi Joy, who is representing the Green Party this evening, but she is also a Green Party councillor for St. Paul's. I'll come last to last. Next, then there's Max, sitting next to Linda, who's our chair, who I'll come back to in a moment. Max Wilkinson is Liberal Democrat councillor and party candidate. Am I correct? Potentially, yes, good. And Julie Farmer is chair of the Labour Party in Cheltenham and also will be representing Labour in the council elections for St. Mark's. And then Alex Chalk, who I'm sure all of you recognise, who's our current MP, and obviously he represents the Conservative Party. So keeping them all in line will be Linda Aspey, who is an experienced facilitator, coach, and climate psychologist. So she comes with a lot of experience, but give her, as she said, she's not Fiona Bruce, but she's waiting for the call from BBC. We have a few little AV channel. We have one roving mic for when we do have some audience engagement, but it will probably be on a time constraint, and one roving mic amongst the panel, and Linda will have her own mic. So without further ado, I'd like to please welcome our panellists and our chair, and I hope you have a very informative evening.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Lovely. Thank you all for being here when you actually could be outside enjoying this really warm, balm evening. It's lovely out there, isn't it? So as Vanessa said, we've got a few questions to run through. And just to be really clear, it's not a kind of question time as on the BBC. I won't be asking members of the public to keep feeding back or to go forward. We've got a number of questions that I'm just going to ask the panel. And where there is time, I will re-engage with the audience. But it's so it may not be, otherwise, well, we wouldn't get through very much, if that's all right with you. But we've got some questions, and I'd like to kick off. And a couple of things I'd just like to say. It would be really lovely if people could listen really well. It's not a hustings, and it's not meant to be a debate. It really is an information session for you in many ways. So if you do hear something that you don't agree with, I would prefer you don't interrupt if you can possibly manage it. It's sometimes really hard not to, but if you can possibly manage it, that would be great. And also to let people, to finish speaking what they're saying. There's enough battles going on out there without having one in here, really. So what else was I going to say? I think that's about all. But we are hoping you have a really informative evening and that you do get some of your questions answered. So the first question comes from a gentleman called Stuart, who I actually believe isn't here anyway. So they are. Hello. Thank you for this question. We've just slightly shortened it just for this purpose. So climate change is the biggest challenge, possibly the greatest challenge facing humanity, with global temperature records having now been broken for 10 months in succession. With governments being elected every 4 years, it's very hard for an elected, how does an elected government change the focus away from this 4-year manifesto pledge to actually take cohesive and decisive action to solve this long-term problem? So that's the background to the question. The question is, what is your political party going to do differently to make us believe that you are serious about the future of the planet, given that you only have a 4-year manifesto? So I'll say that again if that would be useful. What is your political party going to do differently to make us believe that you're serious about the future of our planet? And obviously this may not apply to you.
I'm interested in the answer.
You're lovely, and I may well come to you anyway. So thank you. given this 4-year manifesto. Who would like to kick us off? Who'd kick off with Alex, if we would?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for hosting. I'm sure you're going to put Fiona Bridge in the shade. Thank you very much for
The microphone's there, should want to. Yeah.
Great, sorry, hopefully you can hear. So the specific question that was asked, I think the starting point is that we should recognise that the challenge is incredibly urgent and incredibly intense, and nothing that any of us say should in any way impinge upon the urgency of doing more. But I think it is also important to note where we've come from. So I was looking at my grid today. You can look at it, iamkate.com, and it'll tell you what the grid is producing at any one time. And I was astonished. Admittedly, it was a very windy, very sunny day, but we were actually, of all the electricity we were producing as a nation, the total amount that was coming from fossil fuels was, and this is an unusual day, 3%. Quite extraordinary. So if you think what's happened since 2010, in 2010, 40% of our electricity came from coal. By the end of this year, it will be 0. And so if you look at the total decarbonisation, we're the first G7 country, the first, we've beaten America, France, Germany, Japan, Canada and so on, to get to 50%. That's a reduction on 1990 levels. The figure for France, by the way, is 23%. So I am not sitting here for a second saying it's all done. It plainly is not. There are massive challenges on transport and on heating. But it's also the case that we should recognise that even though we're only 1% of global emissions, we have gone quite a long way. And the fun thing I'd say is on the specific issue about how can we be sure. The next big target is 2030. Our nation is committed to decarbonising by 68% compared to 1990 levels. We're already at 50. The EU comparison, by the way, is 61%. So that's not like pat on the back for the UK, whatever. It's actually that we are showing some important leadership. We are clear we need to go further and faster. The urgency is now. Final thing I would say, yes, it is one of the biggest challenges. Let's not forget the other massive challenge that no one talks about, antibiotic resistance, but that's a whole other story. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Can we come to you, please? To Julie Farmer.
Thank you. Thank you. Gosh, antibiotic resistance on top of everything else. I thought Alex would obviously talk up what the Conservatives have been doing over the last 14 years. Everything I've read, and I have to say I'm not an expert on this, so the invitation to speak tonight has triggered off a lot of research. And it is true that things have improved. Everything I've read, though, in terms of reviewing what's happened so far, is that things have slowed down. And generally speaking, there's a lack of vision, there's a lack of strategy from the current government. In particular, there's a lack of coordination with the work that could be done at local level, and I know that's of particular interest to the people here tonight. So there's a lot more work that could be done, and which, as I understand it, the Labour Party is planning to do. And in fact, a document was published only a few days ago on their local government manifesto, which talks a lot about the opportunities for local people to work closely together to help implement the various aspects of Labour's national policy around green investment, green energy transitions, various other plans that we have as and when we come to power. But I do think that the focus on recognising that local government has a huge amount to offer in this scenario, and that what Labour wants is to devolve power as much as possible down into localities, because it's recognised that the best plans for dealing with net zero at a local level are developed by local communities who know the issues in their community and can work collectively with local government to make those plans and make that happen, because actually that can contribute something like, well, local government collectively has about 80% contribution in a variety of ways to reaching net zero. So it's a massively important part of the system, which currently is grossly underfunded. We know that that's been the case. We know that there were local authorities on the brink of bankruptcy. And where, although the Conservative government has asked them to do more, there is no extra funding for that work. So the Labour Party would not do it that way. The Labour Party is planning to invest in Great British Energy, a publicly owned company that would drive this forward, and a whole series of plans that then cascade from that programme, focusing particularly on involving people at the local level in their own communities.
Thank you. I'm going to actually pass to Tabi so that we're not passing the salt all evening. Tabi, to you. Tabi for the Greens.
Thank you so much. So I kind of feel as though it feels slightly reductive to just be, it's a bit insular to just think about the UK's impact, because we really have so many opportunities to reach out to the global population as well. And we do have... Sorry, thank you so much. Okay, sorry, yeah, it's eating the microphone. Does this help? Is this a little bit better? Okay, sorry, not great at projecting my voice. So basically we need to reach out more to the global community and kind of make sure that we're actually empowering other nations to be able to make the energy transition as well. We have a really exciting opportunity with many African countries to actually leapfrog over coal power generation and just go straight to solar. But the way we would have to do that is by forgiving existing debts that they have that actually incapacitates their ability to deal with the climate crisis. It's not enough to just say the UK is doing our bit. We all live on the same planet, so we really need to take... we're citizens of the world, really. We want to make sure that we're bringing everyone along with us and empowering them as best we can. It's interesting thinking about the 4-year term, because I think Indigenous America, in Indigenous American culture, there's this idea about having seventh generation thinking, where you're actually not just thinking about a 4-year term, you're thinking about what the impact will be on people hundreds of years away from now. And I appreciate the Green Party's part of what drew me to working with the Green Party is the fact that we are actually speaking to loads of people, loads of our representatives come from all walks of life. I was actually working in funeral care, customer service, I was a data processor before I was a counsellor. And loads of my colleagues, like their teachers, their students, they are, like their business owners, they come from all walks of life, and we're basically bringing our own experience into that. So I kind of feel like we want to make sure that we're actually hyperpowering that. We're thinking about what is motivating individuals and kind of putting them off from taking climate change action. I would say that probably around 40% of people want to do more to protect our environment, to protect wildlife. Thank you so much. And it's just about empowering them, really. Again, on the local level, devolution is so valuable with that as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I would pass now to Max. Thank you very much. Max Wilkinson.
Thank you. I joined the Liberal Democrats and got involved in politics because I come from a family of environmentalists. My father was a park keeper and then managed green spaces for his whole life, and my mother is a very passionate vegetarian and supporter of animal welfare and animal rights. I joined the Liberal Democrats because I thought they were the party that had the best opportunity to deliver the change that was best aligned with my values. But I think it's important for us all on the panel to acknowledge that there isn't a single political party that has a monopoly on the best ideas for dealing with climate change and the nature emergency in particular. And that kind of consensus, I think, is really important for us all to acknowledge, because if we go into the next general election knocking each other and pretending that one of us doesn't agree or believe in it, or that everyone who is not in my party is in some way unholy on this issue, then I don't think we'll take the debate very much further. Where I do think we've had a difficulty recently is that the consensus that was there in Parliament was broken by Rishi Sunak in one of his speeches, where he was talking about moving the deadlines for various shifts backwards. Now, I think when actually you watch the speech, it sounded fairly reasonable, some of those things and the points that he was making about the difficulties meeting those challenges. However, some of the post-speech communications left a lot to be desired, and I think that has done a lot of harm to the debate. Now, I make that point in contrast to the original point which I made about no one having a consensus, or no one having their monopoly on what is the best approach. What would the Liberal Democrats do? So if you vote for the Liberal Democrats, you're voting for a party that will set a net zero deadline and stick to it. We're not going to be changing any of the deadlines for transition to green energy. And that going with that is so many different points. You're talking about the energy grid, and Alex was right that we've made a great deal of progress on the energy grid, largely, in many cases, I think, due to work that was set in train in the noughties under the Labour Party, and then followed up by the coalition government, specifically led by Ed Davey, the party leader of the Liberal Democrats. So you can judge politicians and political parties by what they've done and their record. So the energy grid success, I think, has been an absolutely huge one. So at the national level, we do need to focus on that. We also need to roll out an emergency insulation programme for private and public housing. That's going to be so important because we can't solve the problem of getting to net zero if people are living in old and drafty houses. And of course, in Cheltenham, a Regency town, we have a specific issue there. Julie, I think, made some really good points about how local government is best placed to make some of those decisions about net zero. Cheltenham has declared the climate emergency. I was the councillor who brought that motion through. With that climate emergency declaration did come a very clear request for more power and money for local government to deal with the problems that we know that we have. Despite the fact we haven't had more power given to us and that we've had most of our money taken away, we have made great strides locally in Cheltenham. We've got planning rules which mean that Miller Homes and Persimmon and others are bringing forward net zero housing in Cheltenham. We've already seen the private sector delivering net zero housing in Cheltenham. We've cut our ice rink carbon footprint by 98% year on year, which is absolutely massive, and Cheltenham is now being used as an example. So if you vote for the Liberal Democrats, you're voting for that, you're voting for the track record of action that I have locally and that the party has nationally. And when the manifesto comes out, there will be so much more about the environment because that's core to our values as Liberals.
Thank you very much. I'll come to you not on this one, but on another one if you don't mind. And if you've got thoughts, perhaps you'll share them then. Thank you, just to keep to time. So the second question comes from Eva. Is Eva here? Nope. Okay, well, hopefully Eva will get to watch the film. How can we improve the accessibility of being sustainable when it often comes with a significant financial cost? A few examples are paying for solar panels, special eco-friendly products, electric cars, and insulation, particularly in listed housing stock, which touches on the last point. I'd like actually to come to Ian, because that might be something that you get asked about in your work.
I get asked about it a lot because most of my clients are small businesses, and that's, cash is always at the forefront of their minds. I think it is a very important question. I think, going back to some of the earlier points, we need a more long-term view and a more consensus view. So I think we need to see access to funding that goes ideally beyond the life of one parliament, and I think long-term thinking that says, we're going to make funds available to introduce the right technologies or so on, and know that that's not going to suddenly be taken away in 6 months' time. How that can happen is perhaps a question more for the realms of the politicians, but I certainly applaud the question. I think it's a critical question that we need to try to find an answer to.
Thank you. You passed to Tabi. So Tabi, how can we improve the accessibility of being sustainable when cost is such a factor?
Yeah, it's a really good question, honestly, because the thing is that it's easy to say that the Green Party are naive and that we're just making loads of really unreasonable demands that aren't based in an economic reality. But ultimately, I kind of feel as though green investment is always going to be like good debt. I mean, it's a mortgage on a house, really, for those home owners out there. The thing is that it's actually, dealing with the climate crisis can be like dealing with Brexit. It is something that is all-encompassing. It's something that's systemic. And we can kind of meet the same sort of similar challenges just by the right funding in the right place. I think it's important to be quite critical about the idea about growth, like economic growth, because it needs to be the right kind of growth in some ways. Like, are you thinking about, the growth of, for instance, if you kind of have, I'm trying to think about something that's not too contentious an issue, but are you kind of thinking about growth that's kind of based in unsustainable business practices? Or are you thinking about growth that's kind of based in, more ethical, more sustainable, more helpful, socially helpful practices? So we kind of want to make sure that, the norm becomes what's sustainable, and you're not going out of your way to find the right pension scheme, the right mortgage fund, the right bank account. I think that some of the hardest hitting things that we can do as an individuals is to change how our banking is done, for instance, and just try and make sure that we're not investing irresponsibly in something that's very harmful. But otherwise, yeah, I completely understand it's very overwhelming, and you have to think about, you kind of have to ground yourself in what human capacity is to deal with this. I think that this is why collective change is so vital, because it's actually making an egalitarian cause. Instead of just having individual actions to things, we're actually coming together as a community. So I don't think that can be understated, really, in terms of importance.
Thank you, Tabi. Can we go down to Alex?
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Max. Look, I think Eva's absolutely got to the heart of it. So if you look at the Cheltenham constituency, which everyone here, by you on the end, are interested in representing, so there are 18 wards at present. Of those 18 wards, it's worth reflecting that 3 of them are in the bottom decile of income per capita, not just anywhere in Gloucestershire, not just anywhere in the southwest of England, not just anywhere in England, anywhere in the United Kingdom. Right, now that's an extraordinary fact, and anybody who aspires to take on this role must have a plan for how you are going to look after people who sometimes come from deprived backgrounds and do so in a way that is equitable. And so in that context, we have to work out what is the right pace to proceed at a way which balances the competing considerations. And just to put it in context, as I said, we're about 1% of global emissions. I was saying earlier that, in fact, we're doing quite well today because it's a windy day. So here's the thing. So at the moment, we're generating 28.5 gigawatts. In the last year alone, China has added 42 gigawatts in additional coal-fired electricity power generation. So just in 1 year, in coal-fired power stations, the entirety of the UK. And so we have to think, right, well, the reality is, although we should show leadership, absolutely right we should show leadership, but the reality is unless the mega emitters help, then we are going to be in difficulties. So we have to strike the balance, remembering some of those deprived communities. So what is that balance? We think that the balance is to set out a heat and buildings strategy, £3.9 billion. That includes a £1.6 billion for 133,000 low-income households to ensure that they can be better insulated. It also means that £7,500 will go as a grant to people for ground source or air source heat pumps. That means that we should get up to a level of 600,000 per annum. Now, heat pumps, it's an old technology, it's 19th century technology, as you know, it's a fridge in reverse, basically, but it's not necessarily right for every property, but we think that's the right balance. So 3.9 billion, let's get to 68% reduction on CO2 levels. That would be faster than America, which is at 0, by the way, faster than France, faster than Germany, faster than Canada, Australia, all these nations. We spend the money, we do what is affordable, but we make sure we do not load unaffordable costs on some of the most deprived people in our community. Because if we do so, we will lose the argument. And that would be a disaster for our planet.
Thank you. Can we go to Max, please? And then Julie, if you wouldn't mind being last.
Thank you. I identified a lot with what Tabi was saying at the beginning. I think we can't afford not to do this, and there are a lot of people who feel like they would like to do more, but then they look at how much it costs to buy an electric vehicle, because that's something that is put out there in the media as a thing that you can do, and it's prohibitive for most families in Cheltenham. And even though we have some of the poorest communities in the region, we also have some of the richest communities in the region as well. But this, for me, comes down to whether the government is fully committed to the things that it says it's committed to doing. If the government isn't committed enough to intervene in the market and continue with that intervention over a long period of time, then the signal will be sent to business that business shouldn't invest. And that's one of the real risks that we now have as a result of some of the statements that have been made fairly recently. Now, the point is that green investment now means that we'll pay now, but we'll pay less later on. Because the longer-term costs of dealing with climate change, and in Gloucestershire we know about how much it costs to deal with widespread flooding and wide-scale flooding, the longer-term costs are going to be absolutely astronomical. And those poorer people living in our poorer communities, the people who are in most need of support from local government and national government and their local councillors and their local representatives, they will be done a disservice if in the longer term decisions that have been made now to roll back on some of our commitments are taken. So it's really important that when we do get to whenever the election is taking place, we have that at the forefront of our mind, because we have to vote in a climate positive way, because it will cost us a lot more later, even though the shorter term costs seem like they might be difficult to bear. And that doesn't mean forcing everyone to have an electric vehicle. Doesn't mean forcing everyone to get rid of their gas boiler. It means having a just transition at the soonest possible time. The technology is already there. We know it's there, and we just need the government to commit to being willing to allow the private sector and the state sector to invest in it.
Thank you. Would you pass to Julie? Thank you, Julie.
Yes, thank you. Well, that's a good lead into where Labour, I think, is looking to develop on this. Because the plan that we have, the Green Investment Plan, is looking exactly at that and encouraging working with private partners, private industry. They're ready to go. They're waiting for the green light to get on with it, to develop all the different technologies that we need. But at the same time, recognising that we have a situation in the country now where, I mean, it's interesting that Alex can just say, we have these 3 deprived wards. They've been in power for 14 years. Why are we still in this situation? Why do we still have 4,000 children in Cheltenham living in poverty? So, yes, there's a balance to be found, but I suspect our answer would be slightly different as to where that balance should sit. So one of the things we have to do is looking at ways that those people on low incomes, A, can find work and working situations that improve their situation. And we will be looking at, for example, in those industrialised areas where jobs are needed, to invest in those industries. We're not going to let, what happened to the Welsh mining valleys, for example, happen again. As we change to a green economy, we'll make sure that new jobs are there for communities. But also, the idea of working at community level is also to create cooperative opportunities where people, as part of their local community, benefit from things like heat networks. So thinking about how to incorporate people's needs without them having to find the money themselves. The other thing, we're talking about buying electric cars. A lot of people don't have a car in Cheltenham and in many other parts of the country. And if they had better public transport services, they would feel less deprived by that lack. So we need to shift everybody away from the expectation that they get around town in a car. Let's have good public transport. We used to have much better public transport. It's suffered a lot over the last 14 years, and it's time we really got back to that with green vehicles and frequent services, integrated public transport services, so that people on lower incomes are not disadvantaged in any way by that situation.
Thank you very much.